I'm just never going to get this video out because it's always some little mistake that I have. And it's either really close to the beginning or something that's a little later in the video, and it's like I just got to start it over. I need to learn how to edit videos is what I need to learn how to do. So I hope everyone's doing better than I am. I mean, I'm fine. I'm just a little frustrated with all this. I came across a poll with Tim Video talking about how there's been a cyber attack done some way so that it's going to affect the meat market. And with Joe Biden, with his inflation, and then we had that cyber attack against the oil pipeline, and they paid $5 million to kind of get control over it again. And it's like, well, for $5 million, you couldn't solve the problem? You couldn't hire people to come in and deal with it? That was your answer? So now we have another cyber attack. I wonder how much money they're going to demand. It's like, good job. So if you do not like being lied to and manipulated, and you want to know the truth about things because you would rather do other things, because YouTube has so many cool things out there of all these little projects and people who run tests and experiments to see what's going on and all these things that you could better your life for yourself, for others, whatever. And instead of going around in this endless circle, then give it a like, give it a thumbs up. I've got Patreon and Subscribestar if you're doing really well and would like to help out a little bit more. I'd appreciate all of it, because I am going to build a website where I know exactly what to do to help make things a hell of a lot better than what they are right now. So anyways, let's go ahead and get into this. And we're going to start off a little bit with defining inflation and what it means and what it does and kind of things along that. So from Investopedia, inflation is a measure of the rate of rising prices of goods and services in an economy. If inflation is occurring, leading to higher prices for basic necessities such as food, it can have a negative impact on society. No, it is a negative impact on society whenever basic necessities are going up. Whenever food, clothing, and shelter, if they're all going up, that is not a good thing. Key takeaways. Inflation is a measure of the rate of rising prices of goods and services in an economy. Inflation can occur when prices rise due to increases in production costs such as raw materials and wages, because that is a cost of running the business, is paying your employees. Also, a surge in demand for products and services can cause inflation as customers are willing to pay more for the product. So this is kind of a natural occurring inflation that happens, and there's kind of a limit to it. Some companies reap rewards of inflation if they can charge more for their products as a result of the high demand for their goods. Inflation can occur in nearly any product or service, including need-based expenses such as housing, food, medical care, and utilities, as well as want expenses such as cosmetics, automobiles, and jewelry. So there are two that they're talking about here. Your needs that you need to have to be able to kind of live and function, and then wants, which are things that if you didn't have them, you would still be fine. Central banks of developed economies, including the Federal Reserve in the U.S., monitor inflation and say they do not do that. The Fed has an inflation target of approximately 2% and adjusts monetary policy to combat inflation if prices rise too much or too quickly, which they cannot do. That this part here is a lie. We're going to continue to move on more about the definition. So, inflation reduces the purchasing power of each unit of currency, which leads to increases in the price of goods and services over time. It's an economics term that means you have to spend more to fill your gas tank, buy a gallon of milk, get a haircut, whatever it may be. In other words, it increases your cost of living. And increasing the cost of living makes things worse for people who are poor, for people who don't have a job, for people who don't have skills. It makes things worse for them because everything has gone up. U.S. inflation has reduced the value of the dollar compared to the dollar's value today with that in the past. So as prices rise, your money buys less. For that reason, it can reduce your standard of living over time. And it's part of the reason that many say that this is why, with my generation and all the ones coming up behind my generation, the standard of living has gotten worse. And it's because you have less purchasing power. Now, for the rich, it really doesn't matter too much, but you're talking like the 1%. So for the rest of us, it's not working out that way. That's why President Ronald Reagan said inflation is as violent as a mugger, as frightening as an armed robber, and as deadly as a hitman. And key takeaways, looks like they kind of have the same thing. Inflation exists when prices rise, but purchasing power falls over a certain period. Demand, supply, and expectations about goods affect inflation rates. So your expectations with technology, an old cell phone, for example, you have lower expectations with that. So it's going to affect it's how much it costs, and new technology will affect how much it costs. The Federal Reserve uses monetary policy to manage inflation, which they do not do, because you can't do that. Because the economy is literally what every single person does with their money. What are you going to be doing with your money next week, next month, next year? And yet they're going to try to determine all this every single year. So whenever you do your taxes is whenever they get a lot of this information. They're trying to base what to set their policies also. They also do this every 4 years with the new administration of the president, just like what Joe Biden is doing right now. It's like, how do you possibly read the minds and know the future of 350 million people? Not to mention, what's the weather going to be like? Because that's going to affect crops and how much food is going to cost. What about other natural disasters? What about just human error? All of these things contribute. So it's literally impossible. You can protect yourself from inflation through wise investments. That's true. You can protect yourself, but there's no sure way of doing this. It's just kind of doing your best guess, because if there was a surefire way, everybody would be doing it. So the 15 minimum wage is a bad idea. And so here we have Walter Williams, and he's going to talk a little bit about why minimum wage doesn't do what it's supposed to do at all.
A lot of people will say, well, the minimum wage is an anti-poverty device.
People are making $6, $7, $8 an hour. They deserve a minimum wage of $15. Anything.
So that's not going to do anything for people who don't have a job. And if you raise the minimum wage up, every single worker has to produce more than what they're getting paid. So if you go work for a business, or let's turn this around. Let's say instead of you working for a business, let's say you're the boss and you've put in your blood, sweat, and tears to make this business, and you're ready to expand. Are you going to hire somebody and you're going to pay them $10 an hour, but let's be more specific. Say you're making shirts, and that in order to cover all of the expenses of the building and the shipping, the utilities, and everything associated with it, and paying the person $10 an hour, well, if they can only make 10 shirts in that hour, so they're only making $50, but the expenses come out to $60 an hour, so you're operating at a $10 loss. You can't do it. That person has to make more than what the expenses are per unit, per shirt. And whenever you average it all out, that means that person has to make enough shirts to be able to not just break even at being able to produce $60 an hour to bring into the business. It has to surpass that. So whenever you get paid $7.25 an hour, you have to make more than that. That means you have to have the skills to be able to produce like $10 an hour. Because they have to pay you, but then they also have all the other expenses that come with having a business. Oh, well, now they have to have another office, or they have to have another machine, they have to have more materials, whatever, so that this new person can do their work. If you raise it to $15 an hour, that means you have to be able to do more. You have to have more skills. So if you don't have the skills, if you don't have a good education, if you went to a public school that was just in Trashville somewhere, and you didn't get any skills, so now you can't have a job, and then they raise the minimum wage, then what are you supposed to do? Well, you can go to the government. You can get on welfare benefits, and that will keep you in poverty. I don't know of anybody who's ever said, thanks to the government and their welfare programs, I'm now a millionaire, and I'm living rich and the high life. No, because receiving money does not increase your skills, your productivity, or anything else of the kind. Because all those people out there who are poor, they're still poor because they don't have any skills to get themselves out of it. Getting a few $100s is not going to make any. I've got money. Now I have money in my hand. I'm not any smarter. If I were to give you this money, how much smarter is that going to make you? What skills are you now going to possess? If I put this money in your hand, I can reach through it. Are you going to be able to go and work on computers? Are you going to be a nuclear engineer? Are you going to be a geneticist? A brain surgeon? Well, what's going to change about you if I hand you this money? Well, is it different if it's money that's coming from the government? I mean, does the paper become magic? No. So then how does it help these people? What always happens is that they lose their jobs, or they have to work more and work harder in order to make things meet. And it means that new businesses that are trying to come up, they can't get started, or it's very hard for them to do it because now they have this basic minimum expense that they have to incur with hiring more people. So it doesn't do anything. And Walter Williams is going to talk about this a little bit more here.
Below that puts you below the poverty level.
Well, that is utter nonsense. It doesn't even pass the smell test. Because if it were an anti-poverty device, well then instead of spending all this money on foreign aid, we just have our experts at the State Department tell Bangladesh, well, you could be rich like we are, just have a higher minimum wage.
That's exactly right. So let's take a third world country. Ethiopia. We can tell them, well, just pay everyone minimum wage. That'll get you out of poverty. It's like, no, it doesn't. If they don't have any skills, if they don't know how to do anything, if they can't produce anything, how does that do anything? It doesn't. It means that any of the small businesses that they do have are just going to have to shut their doors. Let's say that we had a universal basic income, which is kind of what minimum wage is a little bit for people who don't make very much. But a minimum wage does absolutely nothing if you just don't have a job at all. But let's say we had a basic minimum wage or a universal basic income. And let's say that everybody was receiving $1 million every single month. Nobody's a millionaire, even though you're receiving $1 million a month. Because if everybody has $1 million, then that means everyone who has $1 million is poor. I love showing a little clip right here from The Incredibles. And the villain is a guy, whenever he was younger, he admired superheroes. He got turned down. He became resentful about it, and so he came up with these inventions to help make the world think he was a hero, because some of his inventions were kind of nefarious. So this is a little closer to the end, and here, the tail end of his monologue speech here.
And when I'm old and I've had my fun, I'll sell my inventions so that everyone can be superheroes. Everyone can be super. And when everyone's super, no one will be.
Same thing. If everybody was a millionaire, who would be a millionaire? Nobody. You know why? Because you wouldn't be able to buy a damn thing. The dollar store would literally change its name to the $1 million store. Instead of everything costing $1, it would cost $1 million. You just changed the decimal point. That's all that you did. You did not increase purchasing power. And that's what these definitions are talking about over here. So whenever all these things become more, you haven't done anything. When purchasing power falls, that's inflation. Raising the minimum wage does not give you more purchasing power. Whenever an economy fails, whenever they go into the tube, like Venezuela, and I was over there in Poland for a little while whenever I did some joint training, these people were just hauling around all of this money like mad, and they couldn't buy anything. They had millions of dollars, but it wasn't worth anything. It might as well have been monopoly money from the game. You might as well have just bought the game board Monopoly, taken the paper money out of there, and tried to buy something with that. It's worthless. If everybody was had $1 million every single month, who's going to go work a cashier? Who's going to do any work? So where's the food? Where's the clothes? Where's everything going to come from? They're going to say, I'm a millionaire. I don't have to do it. Then there's going to be absolutely nothing out there. It doesn't solve the problem at all. The minimum wage should be abolished. All it does is that it keeps people poor, and it makes it more difficult for people who don't have a job, or if they're getting paid under the table, or some other situation where they're not getting paid minimum wage. It does absolutely nothing for them besides make it more difficult for them to live. A good example are all these people, all these refugees and migrants who come on over who have little to no skills. It just makes things more difficult for them because they come from places where food is incredibly cheap. And then they come here and it's incredibly expensive. It's like, what are they supposed to do? Especially whenever they're illegals and they haven't learned the language, and so good luck trying to find a job. It takes a lot of money to be able to go out and buy a piece of bread over here compared to where it is where they came from. So now we're going to watch this video from PragerU and talk about what they're talking about and the message that they're trying to send.
Progressive politicians love to talk about raising the minimum wage. It makes them sound caring, compassionate, concerned.
That's absolutely right. I don't care about your feelings. Feelings and facts are not the same. Those are two different things. And your feelings do not belong in the world of politics or economics. Maybe they do a little bit in some aspects of politics, but not whenever it comes to the economy. You know, the only time that would come in is whenever you're doing some kind of fundraising for some kind of charity, not whenever you're trying to engage in business practices.
They're on the side of the worker, standing against the greedy employer. The current call is for a national $15 an hour minimum wage, more than double the current federal rate of $7.25.
This is something that Tim Pool has been talking about in some of his videos, where they're saying in a few years that people are going to have savings of $500,000. It's like, yes, because this is kind of the gist of some of what's going to happen. You're going to have all this money, but you're not going to buy it just because you have $500,000. What does it mean if all you can do is just buy toilet paper with it? It doesn't mean anything if there's no purchasing power behind the currency. Now, I don't want to spend $20 to buy a roll of toilet paper. I want to buy a roll of toilet paper for a quarter or less. I don't want to have $20. I want to have purchasing power. I want to be able to buy the same thing with a quarter instead of 20 bucks. It's not this that you want. You don't want 20 bucks. You want to be able to go out and buy a house for a quarter. Wouldn't that be amazing? Man, a whole house for a quarter? I mean, who's going to be living large if that's the way that it worked? Well, that means that you have to drive everything down. You have to drive down wages. You have to drive down the cost of materials. You have to drive down everything. And a minimum wage does the opposite.
A number of cities and states are already there, including New York, California, Washington, D.C., and Seattle.
And you can go online and you can find videos about these small businesses that have had to shut their doors because they cannot afford to have their employees anymore, because whenever they try to increase the cost of their goods to help to compensate for the wages, people don't buy it, and so then their doors close, and then the business owners, they have no money that's coming in, and their employees have lost their jobs too, so they have no money coming into their household as well.
Others are considering it. The left casts the minimum wage debate as a war between...
So here we go again with the emotions. It's like, as a war, it's not a war. It's supposed to be a debate. It is supposed to be based off of facts and reason and studies and research, not your feelings. Not for people to go up there and to grandstand and to yell and to scream and cry.
Between employee and employer. But most business owners pay their workers as much as they can. Finding and keeping good people is the hardest part of any employer's job.
And you see it all the time. If you've ever worked a job, you know how often people quit or they get fired and new people come on. I've had that happen at every single place that I've ever worked. And same thing with all my friends and family. People rotate all the time, and because of technology always changing everything so drastically, it's happening at an even faster rate than ever before.
I know. For 17 years, I ran CKE Restaurants, the parent company of Carl's Jr. and Hardee's. Our company and franchise restaurants employed over 75,000 people. But as with most retail businesses, our profit margins were razor thin, based on my experience.
And it's because the food industry is extremely competitive. You know why? Because who needs to eat? Everybody. You don't eat, you die. So we want to have a lot of competition for it. So whenever you have all these restaurants competing for you to come to buy their food, they have to cut costs as much as they can. They want to have it be as little as possible. If they double the minimum wage, then that's going to double how much all your food's going to cost. I mean, it's a crude representation of what it is that's really going on. It's not quite exactly that, I know. But for simplicity's sake, that's kind of what you're talking about. You're talking about the increase of the food, making it difficult for people to eat, to buy whatever it is that they're going to buy. How does that help? It doesn't.
If we adopt the national minimum wage of $15, here's what will happen. 1, a lot of people will lose their jobs or have their hours reduced. According to a 2014 Congressional Budget Office study, just a $10 minimum wage would cost 500,000 jobs as businesses terminate employees.
I saw this video with Ben Shapiro where he was talking to somebody from California. I forgot the guy's name. And I was glad that the guy was willing to come on there and talk, but Ben Shapiro kind of did a bad job because he was letting this other guy pull these little straw mans out. One of the straw man points that he tried to bring up was, well, whenever we raise the minimum wage, businesses become more effective at running their businesses. It's like, that is not what the minimum wage is designed to do. It's not there to help the businesses. It's supposed to be there to help people with their standards of living. So what are you talking about? Are you talking about businesses, or are you talking about people and their standards of living? It's one or the other. Those are two different things.
Obviously, far more jobs would be lost at $15 an hour. To survive, employers would have to reduce hours even for workers who manage to keep their jobs. That's a
And then these people where they go from $7.25 to $15 an hour, that means before they do all this, their supervisors might be getting $10, $12, $14, $15 an hour. Are they going to be satisfied that they're now making minimum wage whenever before they might have been making double? It's like, no, they're going to say, no, I was doing double the work. I was responsible for all these minimum wage employees and all these other responsibilities with the business. It's like, no, you can double it. Oh, okay, so what, $15 to $30? How does that make things cheaper, making things more affordable for people, especially the people who are in need the most, which are people who are poor?
pay cut. 2, businesses will close and the jobs they created will disappear. A recent report from researchers at the Harvard Business School found that each $1 increase in the minimum wage results in a 4 to 10% increase in the likelihood of restaurants closing.
Okay, so if this is what research from places like Harvard are saying, that whenever you increase it, well, what about the opposite direction? What if we decrease it? Does that mean that more restaurants and stores would open? More people would have jobs? Why is this a debate? The information is in. We know this stuff. It's been research after research after research.
An over $7 an hour increase to $15 would be devastating, not only for restaurants, but for small businesses and their employees. 3, young people will lose that entry-level job opportunity. My first job was scooping ice cream at a Baskin-Robbins in Cleveland, Ohio in the 1960s. I would pay just $1 an hour, but it taught me valuable lessons like the importance of showing up on time.
So this is something that my dad talked about, was that whenever he was a little kid in like elementary school level, that for a dime, he could go and he could buy a burger, a drink, and either fries or a candy bar. It's like, well, yeah, you know, if you're making like $1 an hour and you can get a full meal out of 10 cents, it's like, that's not too bad. You know, that works. You know, you can do something with that. You can't do that today. I mean, you go to McDonald's and it's like, you're going to spend $10. You can spend $10 on one value meal with a burger, fries, and a drink. How's that making things better? If you don't have a job, you don't have a job. If you're poor, you're poor. So how does making everything more expensive help them? How does it help anybody? It doesn't help anyone. And then this is where, if you have a poor education and you don't have any skills, there's still plenty of skills to learn. And so these are skills such as, well, you need to show up on time because the business, they've got a schedule that they have to run. Customers, they expect the store to be open at these hours, and they're waiting. And if they're going to wait, then they're going to go somewhere else where they do have it together. Working as a team, presenting a happy demeanor to customers, which means that it doesn't matter what kind of mood you're in. You better put it aside, get a smile on that face, and do your job, even though you may want to. It's what you have to do so that this can work. And this is something that's lost at a poor school system, where they don't deal with kids who are tardy, who get in detention and ISS. It's like, no, kids should be treating school as their job. They need to show up on time. They need to have a uniform or a dress code. They need to do these things too. And the sooner you start doing this and you start learning it, the easier it is, where you're going to be able to fall into a rhythm of just doing this. You know, even if you're the boss and it happens to be your store, these are things that you're still going to want from yourself and from your employees. Because you didn't do this, all this work, and spend all this money so that other employees, other people could come along and just trash it and have it go down the drain. You'd be furious with that.
Teamwork and presenting a happy demeanor to customers. No one can get that better job until they have their first job. 4, the cost of all workers will have to go up. If you hire a dishwasher at $15 an hour, your cooks will be unhappy with their wages. You're going to have to pay everybody more, which increases labor costs across the board.
That's right. I mean, this is what I was just talking about. You know, so the chef went to culinary school, learned how to cook. He's got all this money that he has to pay back in student loans for going to culinary school. So he needs more than this minimum wage because everything everywhere goes up. Everything.
That's more pressure on profits. Too much pressure and you're out of business. 5. Fewer people will open businesses. $15 an hour is a very steep hill to climb.
Yeah, and this is something that I was just talking about just a moment ago before, is that the entry point to be able to start up your own business or to expand now has this big hill in the way that you have to overcome to be able to do that. How does that help the economy? How does that help small businesses? How does that help employees? It doesn't. The majority of businesses out there are small businesses. It's not these large businesses.
Would-be entrepreneurs will do the math on labor costs and realize it's just not worth the risk. This is a real cost to the economy that we can't measure. A company that never exists never employs any.
So I'm going to stop right there on this one because you should be able to understand in just what the minimum wage does not do.
Well, would you help me to uncomplicate a few things today?
All right.
All right. Segment 1, the present crisis. Now, I posed.
So in case if you don't know, Thomas Sowell, he is an economist, and he's been one for decades.
Notices several places that I'd be interviewing you and asked folks for questions and got overwhelmed with questions. I can only offer a few, but here are some. From Ken Sweeney of Ricochet. This is the basic of the basics. How is wealth created? And why does the United States have the highest per capita GDP of any major country?
That's a good question, and a complicated one to a degree.
Wow. But how many years do I have to answer this question?
It's television. You've got about 90 seconds at the most.
Oh, I guess wealth is created when the circumstances are such that people who know how to create it are free to do so. One of the things that pains me in the current crisis is people saying that Congress really needs to do something to make the economy recover.
And that's a bunch of trash. The government is not like God and angels where they're just casting miracles and making all these wonderful things happen. It's not like they are sitting on this hoard of information that could just make the world better. These politicians are corrupt. Democrats, Republicans, whoever it is that you don't like. And if they had all this wonderful information that they're just hoarding from us, and if they would just do it, but they're keeping it secret for some reason, there would be some corrupt politician who would say, oh, you know what, I'm going to take this information, I'm going to apply it, and I'm going to use it to make myself rich and powerful and to do all of these great, wonderful things. They would all be doing it. But that's not the way that it works. It's really that there are lobbyists that come, they talk to politicians, they manage a way to wash money over to the politicians to help fund their campaign and their lifestyles. And then politicians help out these companies by putting in regulations, laws, and policies that prevent small businesses from creating and forming and becoming competition.
No, they need to let the economy recover. That the economy did not get to be the biggest in the world by politicians doing things. All the millions of other people whose names we don't even know, those are the people who made it the biggest.
So this is something that he talks about in his book, Basic Economics. He does a lot of compare and contrast between the U.S. and the Soviet Union, and that they had a very micromanagement look at the economy where they were hiring all of these people in the government to tell everyone what the prices were, and it just led to complete, utter insanity over there. And now that's why their economy and China's economy, where they've gone more capitalistic. saying that, you know what, it's just too complicated. There's way too much stuff that's going on, because it's everything from these small businesses and lonely workers all the way up to these big corporations and global companies around the world, where they're all coming together, they're all interacting, they're all doing things, and they're the only ones that can decide for themselves what's going on. And it's because it's like, well, my standard of living is not the same as yours. It's going to be different. It's not 100% the same. I have different things. I want different things. I have a different education. I have different debt. I have different things all across the board. And that's why, because of those things, you cannot say that a minimum wage is going to work. Not at all. It's another reason why it won't work.
It's the economy of the world. And if politicians will get out of their way, we can and let the economy recover. It can do that.
Tom, we've been talking about the crisis. Let's take a step back. 1983 until 2008, the American economy experiences a quarter of a century of nearly uninterrupted economic growth. Then, beginning in the autumn of 2008, trouble. What went wrong?
Well, actually, it started much earlier, and I think it was a housing boom, followed by the housing bust, which occurred.
So I like this. I like it whenever they refer back to history and things that have already happened. It's like the data's in. So I know about the housing boom and the housing bubble. I was actually going back to college at the time to complete a degree with business. And I had to write a paper with a few other students about the housing boom and the bust. And even people in my group, there was one guy who got it all completely backwards. Nobody cares about why the bubble bursted. They care about why did the bubble exist in the first place. It shouldn't have been there to begin with. And the reason why it was there was because Obama put trash policies that inflated the market, allowing people to do all of these things. One of them was that they lowered the standards necessary for people to be able to go out there and buy houses. And so people who had no business buying houses, who can't manage their money, were lured into these traps and into all these complicated rules and regulations within the housing market and within banks and all the legal jargon that they got in over their heads, and they put their life savings into it by doing a down payment. They would get behind, then they would lose the house. And it was also these, you can take these notes and you can sell them, and they were selling them as AAA prime mortgage loans or whatever, because they were supposed to be verified and they weren't, but they were being sold as AAA, and they were not. And so it was also bad for some of these investors too. The whole thing was ridiculous. And I remember this one kid who was in my group, he was like, yeah, if the bubble just hadn't burst. It's like, no, because the whole thing was a lie. I didn't say anything I should have, because he didn't say it there until the end whenever we presented, and it just caught me off guard. So.
In 2006.
2006.
And so the reverberations of that is, there are people out there who had trillions of dollars invested in securities based upon mortgages. And when people stopped paying their mortgages, the value of the securities vanished into thin air.
So that's what happened. You know, these people who were not very good at managing their money, they weren't very good at maintaining a job and employment, would stop paying their mortgages, and they were being sold as AAA mortgages. And so all of it kind of collapsed, and it just went down. You could buy homes also with zero down. They had all of these stupid things going on that just... And it was because politicians did this because it all sounded good, but there was absolutely nothing to back it up. And it's like, politicians are not economists. So it's like Obama, I think he went to school to study law, I believe, if I remember correctly. He had absolutely no education whatsoever with the economy, which is why you can say that Donald Trump has done better with the economy, because he's a businessman. Now you can say whenever it comes to war, maybe we didn't go to war at the time, but if we did, you could say he would be an absolutely disaster military commander for sure. So just in case, if you're foreign and you may not know, or you're young and you may not know, is that the president is the only 5-star general there is. He is by default the leader of the armed forces.
You do not argue that this was a financial crisis that spilled over into the real economy. You argue that it was a problem in the real economy, particularly the housing market,
Yes.
that started the problem in the financial sector.
Oh, absolutely. If people had kept paying their mortgages, the securities would have been good, and we would have all lived happily ever after. Now the problem is that the politicians made the mortgages more risky by changing the rules. In other words, at one time, mortgages were considered the safest investment. This is for the widows and orphans who need money coming in regularly, and you put it into real estate. But the politicians decided that we must have more home ownership and more affordable housing. And so they...
I remember all that stuff. Obama was talking about how we need to increase the housing market because housing affects so many other industries out there. So you go out and you just don't build a house. It's, well, you need a carpenter, you need a roofer, an electrician, a plumber. You need furniture stores to be able to put furniture in it, and appliances, and lawn and garden, and all these things that go into it. Housing is a big deal. And it's like, yes, all of that makes sense. But you just can't go in and just have like a magic wand and just wave it about and sign these things and that this is just going to happen. It's like, no, everybody wants to make money and everybody wants success. It's not like the banks could come up with some kind of scheme to screw people over, because banks have competition and it's other banks. And so if they weren't going to, it's just like any other business. If they're not going to compete and they're not going to fight for business, then they go out of business themselves. And that was part of the problem too, was that they did this too big to fail. And it's like, no, they are so big that they should fail. It's like we shouldn't have been paying money for that. And that was something that we talked about. What class was that? It wasn't statistics. It was business law. And so there at the end, we had a little bit of time, and I was like, ask me anything. I got answers for all this stuff. And I know I just knocked it out of the park. The teacher was just back there just agreeing with everything that I said. Her head was just going up and down. I said, what would have happened if we didn't bail those banks out? They would have gone out of business. Well, that means absolutely nothing for any of the customers that are out there. Whatever reasons that they had for going to the bank, it's still there. Whether they want the functions of ATMs to have automatic withdrawals, automatic deposits, if they need bank loans, student loans, car loans, whatever reasons those people have for using the bank, those reasons are still there. So if the bank goes out of business, then they're just going to transfer their interest, their business, to another bank. And so that means that the banks that are still around, they're going to have an increased flux of customers. So they're going to have to hire more tellers, open up more branches, and do all this to help compensate for the influx of business that they now have. Well, guess what? There's now a big supply of people who were working at these banks that closed down that need jobs, and so they get divided up and split up among the other banks that are still there. The only people who don't get this opportunity are the people who are higher up. So, for example, the CEO of these banks out there, they're not going to get hired, because these other banks that made it, who did do good practices, they're going to say, I'm not going to hire you. I'm not going to blame the teller for your bank going under. They weren't in charge of anything. I will blame you, Mr. CEO or Miss CEO or whoever you are. I will not hire you. You're trash. Your garbage policies, your garbage rules led your bank to bankruptcy. I do not give a damn about any bank higher up personnel losing their jobs. Oh, boo-hoo-hoo. Chances are they're making millions. I don't feel sorry for them at all. So let those banks fail. Let every single big business fail, because they have competition and they'll pick up the slack no matter who they are. Same thing with cars. There's no automobile industry car company out there that needs to be bailed out, because if Ford or Chevy or Dodge or whoever goes under, all the other companies are going to see an increase in sales and an increase of everything. And so it's all going to work out, except for those people at the top. So let them fail. I don't care.
They began to prescribe rules. You had to lend money to people you wouldn't have lent to before. And of course...
Yeah, and that was something else, was that they also lowered the interest rates, making it easier for people to get loans too. And the reason why you had higher interest rate for some people was because they were not good with handling their money. And whenever you increase minimum wage and you're making everything more expensive, well, that's a little bit more math involved. It might be simple math, but for some people, just doing simple math is difficult. And with some people, they just don't want to be materialistic and they don't want all of this stuff. For some people, they value friends and family more than materialism. And they don't want this nonsense.
There was a reason they weren't lending to them before. And we discovered the hard way what that reason was. That they weren't likely to be able to pay them back.
Very important.
You can also say that there were also people who understood the changes going on within the system and they were con artists. There was definitely that was going on where banks and they were sending out loan officers trying to get all of these loans because all this stuff is backed by the federal government. And they knew that the banks were going to be bailed out by the government. The government's done it multiple times, and that was something that I found out while we were researching doing this paper, was that this was a trend. And this is part of the reason why the bubble burst. All right, sorry about that. Had a phone call. So the next day, here I am. So that's I hope I'm not too repetitive. We're just going to pick right up where I left off with Thomas Sowell on basic economics here. Now he's going to ask about the housing market collapse that happened in 2008 a little bit here. So,
Did what happened indicate the housing market problem? Did that indicate that markets, wonderful as they are, wonderful as you demonstrate over and over again in basic economics that free markets are, that they sometimes experience troubles, calamities even, that the markets are imperfect because they're rooted in human experience and we live in a fallen world? Or did it demonstrate that the government messed things up?
The government messed them up.
So to be clear, nobody is saying that markets don't fluctuate, that markets don't have their issue. Of course they do. And he points it out. It's because people do everything. People aren't perfect. And then plus just everything changes. Nobody is saying that. Nobody is suggesting this utopianism that everything's going to be perfect. That is not it at all. And Thomas Sowell, he's going to answer this appropriately. At least from everything that I know as of this moment, this is the answer. You know, unless there's some new information that arises, I'm always subject to changing my opinion on all of this stuff. But for now, this is what I feel off my knowledge is.
After all, for a century, you never had this kind of crash in the real estate market. For centuries, people did their life's work lending money for mortgages, did that without the politicians interfering. Once the politicians started meddling, the results were what you could have predicted. It's what was predicted, in fact.
All right.
So be clear, he's not saying that things would be perfect. He's saying that, yes, things do get bad, but only some. And they got much worse with politicians. Because politicians, they do not care about what's right or wrong. They're not loan officers, they're not bankers, they're politicians. They do not know what's what. And so politicians, they just go off of crowd mob mentality. It's like, oh, this is what the crowd wants. Well, if I want to be elected, I better side with them. So let's go ahead and let's listen to his answer one more time here.
The government messed them up. After all, for a century, you never had this kind of crash.
So he said for centuries, they never had this kind of a crash. He's not saying that they never had crashes. He never said that the market didn't fluctuate. Of course they do. And if you've read or if you've listened to his book on economics, he talks about how complex the economy is. And he gives the example of like baseball gloves. That if there's an increased demand for baseball gloves, then that means there's an increased demand for leather, because that's what baseball gloves are made out of. Well, because baseball gloves are on the rise, and you have this demand now for leather, It means other things like wallets and gloves and all these other products that are made out of leather. Now, all these other products are now having to go up in price because leather is being used more for that, and so they're fighting more. You can't stop that stuff at all. It's because who knows? If baseball were to resurge in popularity, like perhaps after COVID, maybe people get out there and they're like, oh man, we really took it for granted about not going outside. I really appreciate being out here and being active. This is so great. And people pick up all these sporting activities to kind of celebrate. Then, yeah, what would that mean? It means there's going to be a demand on all of these products, and every associated product is also going to feel the sting. But the market will adjust. And it'll adjust because there are going to be some people out there who are going to say, wow, leather's selling really well. I'm going to raise more cattle so I can make more money selling more leather. And then that'll drive the prices down because now there's more out there, and it'll equal out and it'll balance out again. So, and that's what he does in this book. He talks about it a lot because this is what they had to do over there in the Soviet Union, because they were trying to price out every single little thing, and it required the government's approval to make price changes. And so they were always behind the curve. They were always screwing stuff up. It's just ridiculous.
In the real estate market, for centuries, people did their life's work lending money for mortgages, did that without the politicians interfering.
And that's what his book is all about, on all these books, because that's what he does. He does research, he writes these books, and he bases it off of what has actually happened. And he's been doing this. I mean, the first time where I saw this really well was, again, with this show, Firing Line, with William F. Buckley Jr., and it's back in 1983, and he's talking to a feminist lawyer who's trying to say that there's a wage gap, and he said, I don't know what you're talking about. Nowhere anywhere in the world, between any groups of any kind, is there this fantasy land of everybody getting paid the same. That there's always this diversity of pay that happens, and there's absolutely nothing that you can do about it. And whenever the government tries to step in, the only thing that they do is that they make it worse. And he just emphasizes again that if you really want things to be as fair as you possibly can, nobody needs to get in the way. These politicians need to get out of the business of the economy, because it's competition. It's like whenever you're fighting to keep your business afloat, you do everything that you can to have it so you have as little profit as possible. Because if you don't, if you're not penny pinching, well, this other business over here, well, they're doing it, and they're going to take you out. And now with the global economy, where you can buy things online from anywhere around the world, it's more fierce than ever. Our prices should be just dirt cheap. But thanks to politicians with all this crap, they're not going down. And with all these innovations in technology, with robotics and kiosks and all this stuff, where you've taken the human element out of it a lot, it's why some of these jobs are actually coming back from China and Mexico, because it's cheaper to have the robotics doing the work instead of even this really cheap labor. And you get to bring it back over here and kind of spout off on how good you are because you brought American jobs back, and it's like, yeah, well, 30 jobs were lost and you gained 2 jobs because it's just some IT people who are doing some maintenance every now and then. It's a big decrease, but it's like it's inevitable. So
Once the politicians started meddling, the results of what you could have predicted. It's what was predicted, in fact.
All right. Response to the crisis. The Federal Reserve floods the financial markets with liquidity, while first the Bush administration and then the Obama administration enact stimulus and bailout packages that now amount to, as best I can make it out, something like $3.6 trillion. Correct responses to the crisis? Did the government do the right thing?
No.
So this is something that I talked about just a moment ago about bailouts of big businesses. So this is what they're referring to. Let's listen to what he has.
Those are easy questions.
All right.
One of the painful things, I mean, you can call anything you want to call it. You can call it a stimulus, All the data indicated it didn't stimulate anything except boondoggles across the country as politicians handed out money to all the special interests that they are interested in pleasing.
And that's it right there. The title that they've given the bill, whatever it is that they're trying to pass, whatever legislation, just because that's what the title says, that doesn't mean that that's anything associated with what's actually in the bill. And even though the bill might even have wording in it that sounds really nice, that doesn't mean that it's going to work. You know, and that's exactly what he's talking about right here. Stimulus bill, yeah, you can name it anything you want. That doesn't mean that it's going to stimulate. Yeah, you can give money to these people or these businesses or whatever, but that doesn't mean that it's going to stimulate anything either. So you can have it worded however you want to. It does not matter. What matters is what actually happens. And what happened? Nothing. Didn't stimulate a thing.
But for example, when they dumped all this money into banks, the idea was the banks would then pass that money on and more lending.
Right.
Lending went down. They dumped all this money into the businesses. The businesses reduced their investment. All kinds of money is piling up. There's record amounts of money piling up.
What about GM? Surely that's the one success story. Workers are still employed. GM is now a competitive.
So moving a little bit away from the housing discussion right here, and so now they're talking about GM, General Motors, which had a bailout before all of this because bailing out the banks was not a new thing. They bailed out banks before and other big businesses. So.
Company again, they're paying back billions to the American taxpayer.
Oh, this is the famous one where we guaranteed them and it didn't cost the taxpayers a dime.
Right.
Yes. It's like going to Las Vegas, you know, and saying I put my quarter in the machine and out came $100. Yes. Now put another quarter and see if you get another 100.
Right.
And put $1 million in there and see if you get $1 million back. We had the same thing with the savings and loan crisis a couple of decades ago. They said, you know, we're back in the savings and loan industry, we're guaranteeing it, but it's not costing the taxpayers anything. Well, it's not until it fails, and then it costs the taxpayers.
Yeah, and so in a way what he's talking about is that there's always the potential for these companies to be able to do good if they want to. But it's just a roll of the dice. It just depends on what it is that the companies want to do. It depends if they can even do it in the first place. And, I mean, you can't force the economy to do anything because you can't force the people to do anything. It's like people are going to put their money wherever it is that they want to do it. And if they've lost faith in the banks or if they've lost faith in the car companies and they go shopping somewhere else, if they decide, oh, well, I'm not even going to buy American, I'm going to go buy Toyota. It's like, okay, I tell you what, for me, I would love to be able to buy an American car, but I'm about to buy another car. I've got one on my radar here that I'm going to look at. It's a Toyota. And why? Because those things just keep going forever. They have like hardly any maintenance required to them, and it's like, why? I'm not going to give scum my money because of some slogan. Buy American. It's like, well, build good stuff. Don't build crap. And fine. But it's like, I don't want to spend my time buying new vehicles, going into the shop, having all this work done because it's trash. You want me to buy yours? Well then, show me that it's worth buying. It's American made. Well, American made is crap made. Don't sell me that. You know, do something that's worth a damn. It's just, and if you like American made cars, I mean, more power to you. I don't care. But for me, it's like I've got better things to do. And it's just time after time after time after time. It's Toyota. So, you know, but I'm not going to just do it just because it's American made. You know what? I'm going to go start up a business where I'm going to have a store and I'm going to sell things and say it's American made and it's going to break down too. Would you be happy with that? No. So why would it be that way with anything else? It's like, I don't have money just shooting out my butt that I can just throw around like mess. Like, get out of here.
Segment 2, what is to be done now? Fed Chairman Ben Bernanke announced this past autumn that the Federal Reserve would engage in a new round of, quote, I'm using his term, quantitative easing, the so-called.
This is going to be the last question and answer that we're going to listen to, because you're going to get the gist of it after all this. And if you still want to know more, I'll have links in the description below for these videos so you can watch them in their entirety.
Called QE2. The Fed will purchase, Tom, wipe that smile off your face. This is serious. This is serious. The Fed will purchase some $600 billion of Treasury instruments to keep interest rates low and spur economic growth. That's Ben Bernanke. On the other hand, we have our colleagues at the Hoover Institution, John Taylor, Mike Boskin, and John Kogan, signing an open letter to Ben Bernanke, which read in part, quote, we believe the large-scale asset purchase plan should be discontinued. The planned asset purchases risk currency debasement and inflation, and we do not think they will achieve the Fed's objective of promoting employment, close quote. Whose side is Tom Sowell on?
Oh, I'm on the side of people say they shouldn't have done it.
Easy, another easy one.
Oh my gosh, yes. There used to be a phrase, it was called monetizing the debt. It means that the Treasury Department has deficit spending, so they put out all these bonds that they're selling, and if the public won't buy them, the Federal Reserve will buy them, because the Federal Reserve can legally print its own money. So it's no problem for the Federal Reserve to buy them. It's just that that's what that amounts to is one, inflation, and two, it amounts to a hidden tax, which will not be confined to the rich, as they call it. I mean, in other words, if you've got X thousands of dollars in your bank account and the Federal Reserve starts printing more money, it is simply stealing the value of the money that you put aside.
Mm-hmm.
So this is something that they're talking about now. So this video, it came out in 2011 from the Hoover Institution. That's where he works. He's a tenured professor. He's, what is it, a think tank that he's a part of? I forgot what it is exactly. Anyways. That is something that they're talking about now with Joe Biden with his spending, is that it's just the government just printing money and going into debt and borrowing money, and it decreases the value of the American dollar, making it worth less. And so if you have money, if you have liquid money somewhere, if you have a bank account, if you have anything, the more liquid it is, the less it's going to be worth. Your purchasing power is going to go down. So you don't want this. And this is, and he's like, this doesn't affect the rich, because what the rich do is that they have money and experience and people that they can hire, and they create an investment portfolio. And they do a diversified investment portfolio where they'll put it in the stocks, not in bonds. I mean, sometimes, yes, but in stocks. They'll buy gold, they'll buy real estate, and so they'll have a diverse portfolio of several different things that they've invested in, and they will not keep this. They do not have this. That's the key. This is what rich people, one of the keys. One of the big things that they don't do is that they don't have cash. They have assets. You know, it's like you hear this, like if you watch Tim Pool, he'll talk about how these billionaires, Mark Zuckerberg and Jeff Bezos or whatever, their salary is only like, it's chump change. And it's because they don't deal in cash. It's assets. These are tax loopholes. You can't pay taxes if you're not getting paid. Well, then you don't ever get paid. It's just a bunch of exchanging of assets is what it is. And so it never gets liquefied. It never becomes cash. It never gets taxed. And then they're just sitting around just grinning from ear to ear because they're just getting away scot-free with all this stuff. It doesn't do anything. It screws out people who have money. And it can screw over businesses because they pick and choose which businesses that they want to help and which ones that they have go under. So it's just, and we're going to talk about that a little bit with Tim Pool's video here.
So that's the same thing as a tax, only it's an inflation tax.
But Tom, you're answering these questions with the greatest of ease, and you even find, I can tell from your face, you find some of the questions amusing. So a layman like me, like our viewers, is, well, now wait a minute. Dr. Sowell's an eminent figure, and I even had in these emails somebody commenting on your lovely baritone voice. You're a sterling figure in all kinds of ways. But Ben Bernanke is a Princeton.
Oh, yeah.
In other words, what is he thinking? What is the other? What does Ben Bernanke think he's doing? It can't be that easy, can it? To say, oh no, that's a mistake.
Well, Ben Bernanke is chairman of the Federal Reserve System. He's no longer a professor at Princeton. Well, he's an emeritus.
Right. He's taking a leave of absence.
Yes. And so we have a whole different set of incentives and constraints on him. One of the most painful things for me was reading an article by Arthur F. Burns based on his experience when he was chairman of the Federal Reserve System.
In the 70s, this would be 60s and 70s, under Richard Nixon.
Yes.
Right.
And he spelled out that when you're in the Federal Reserve System, you're not a free agent. It's not like you're conducting a seminar at Columbia and can just simply say and do whatever you want to do. You're operating within very narrow limits. The Federal Reserve is, quote, independent, unquote, but Congress can change the amount of that independence anytime they take a notion.
So, in other words, effectively, he's saying he's a politician. He has to work for the government. The government has set guidelines and policies in which that he's allowed to operate. And it doesn't matter if it's going to work or not. They're saying we have to do something, and it's because they have constituents that they have to appease so that they can continue to get their money for fundraising, for their political campaigns, and just for their lifestyles. So they have to do these things, because if they didn't, then it's all going to stop, or the guy's going to get fired. It's just... So there's not a choice in any of this stuff whenever you start becoming a politician. It's because, as I keep saying, politicians do not care about the truth. They care about votes. They care about getting elected. And I'm not going to go ahead and show this one. It's the same interview. It's just a little longer in the interview, where he talks about how, again, for like 100 years, we didn't have a Federal Reserve System, and they weren't doing anything, and they've made things worse. So I'll have a link in the description below specifically for this video, so if you want to look into that one a little bit more. And Thomas Sowell, he's just here answering all these questions without any problem. He's like, this is just everyday general understanding and knowledge of this subject. But if you don't know anything about the subject, then you're a fool and you can be led astray. And so who's a fool? We all are. I'm not an expert in this, but I've listened to Thomas Sowell enough and to others such as Milton Friedman and Walter Williams and these other economists. It's just all over the board. And whenever I hear them explain it in layman's terms, it's like, yep, that makes sense. I understand the connections that they're making, and it doesn't hurt that I took several. I have a business degree, so it's not like it's completely foreign to me. So this is what my website's going to do. We're going to lay out these arguments. We're going to bring the evidence, and then there's going to be a verdict that's going to be made on all of these things, so we stop doing this runaround. They're talking all the way back to Nixon. I mean, in some of his discussions, he's talking about whenever he was a kid back in like the 1930s, and his first job and the enactment of minimum wage and just all the problems that it's had. The evidence and the information and everything is there. We have the answers, but it's politicians who are blocking all this stuff, making things worse for all of us. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to listen to a little bit of Tim Pool here. So he starts off talking about how the beef supply is being wiped out, a fifth of it, by this cyber attack. And it's in part, yes, because these people caved to these terroristic demands. They were held up and said, give me $5 million or else. And instead of saying, screw off, they paid the $5 million. So now what's happened? Well, we have another attack. It's like, well, yeah, they got paid. You think that nobody noticed? We don't even know if it's the same group, different group. And the media is trying to play it off as if it's Russia. It's like Russia does not care about $5 million. Putin's a billionaire. No, I don't know who it is. Maybe it is Russia. Maybe it is. I'm not going to say one way or the other. I'm just going to say that I'm extremely doubtful of it. Because that's just their go-to fallback excuse for everything. We're Russian. But anyways, we're going to listen to a little part right now of Tim Pool.
Or as of late. Why? Because the dollar is collapsing. And don't take my word for it. A famous economist said this earlier this year, that by the end of the...
Now, I will say, take Tim Pool's advice with a grain of salt with all of this stuff. As with me, I would prefer you to listen to the specialists more, which is why I have them up there. That's why we listen to Thomas Sowell, Milton Friedman, and so on.
year, it's going to get bad. And we're hearing about the housing market. People in big cities are buying properties sight unseen. They're calling up and saying, I'll just buy it. Why? They don't want to be holding US dollars. One house sold for $1 million over asking. People are starting to freak out from this stuff. And I'll tell you what worries me. Sure, there's a lot of stories about the housing market going insane and gas prices skyrocketing and cyber attacks. But it's the escalation in the attacks on our infrastructure. Now, the cyber attacks themselves are news.
I'm not too interested about the cyber attacks. That would be kind of a discussion in on of its own. But it's like, yeah, this was what I was just talking about a moment ago, is that rich people do not hold cash. They have assets. And you can play that game. You can go back and forth where, yeah, you do have cash for a little while, depending on what's going on with the market being up and down, and specifically what part of the market, whether if it's commodities, if it's real estate, whatever it is. And so there are times whenever you do want cash, and then there are times whenever you do want to transfer too, so, whenever you have the housing market bubble thing going on, there's times whenever you do actually want to invest in that bubble, but you're playing kind of a crapshoot, playing poker a little bit, where you're risking that, and you want to get out before the bubble bursts. And so the longer you can hold on to that ride and go up with that bubble as it gets things more and more expensive and higher, and then right before it busts, you're like, I'll take my money back now, and then it busts and everything collapses. You've made out like a fat cat. Same thing with Bitcoin. Bitcoin just, it's another market. It goes up and down all the time, and it's the same thing. If you can buy it whenever it's low and you can sell it whenever it's high, by whatever means, and it's like it's going on right now. Bitcoin dropped a lot. It's like, all right, well, somewhere along this line, if you were ever interested in buying Bitcoin, this is the time where you need to pay attention and you need to buy. So, as to exactly when that time is, I don't know. I don't watch it. Couldn't tell you one way or the other. But yeah, just, any kind of news and information, especially if the government tries to get involved in any way, if you're in on communities that watch it, you would really want to pay attention and see what they're having to say. So here he's going to talk about how there's a little bit of hope in a way, and so I'll let him speak on this.
There is an option. There is optimism. Cryptocurrency. Don't take any advice from me on what you should buy or where you should buy it. I don't give financial advice. But I can tell you that many more businesses are going to be accepting crypto, and that may be, in my opinion, at least for me, a safe haven for my money, and I'm looking into crypto. I gotta take it very seriously. We don't give...
Yeah, so the reason why crypto in one way is a safe bet is because Bitcoin, for example, the government has no control over it. You cannot make more Bitcoins. There's only a certain amount of Bitcoins out there. And every time they discover a Bitcoin through those mining operations, then it becomes harder to find the next one. And I forget when, but that there's a year whenever every Bitcoin is going to be discovered. You won't be able to mine them anymore. And those machines that have done all the mining, they're supposed to transfer their power on over into actually conducting the transactions. And people who have these mining operations will get paid for doing these transactions, because it'll be like microtransactions. It's not a lot, but whenever you have 1 billion transactions going on, well, yeah, it's going to add up. And the government has no control over it, because everybody who has Bitcoin, or I think this is the way it is with all these cryptocurrencies. Everybody has an electronic wallet, and it has a ledger of everybody's account and how much money that they have, and they all have to align up and be the same. And if somebody else's wallet has a ledger that doesn't match the rest, that's wrong, then this one gets corrected with the majority of them out there. And so whenever you have millions or even billions of these electronic wallets out there, it's like good luck trying to go in there and to change that, because you would have to have the majority of that. So you would have to have millions and billions of electronic wallets that would give whatever it is that you wanted to have. The problem, though, with all of this is that it is not stable at all. And that's why we had the gold standard, because that helped to stabilize our currency. That this is a promissory note. A promissory note of $1 value worth of gold over there at Fort Knox. That's what that is. Technically, you should be able to go and exchange your dollar and get however much gold a dollar's worth, however little bit that is. It wouldn't be a lot. But that's why it's stable. You can argue that we've actually kind of moved away from that. And it would be, I guess, one of the arguments is that we have more money, more dollar, more promissory notes than what we do gold. And it's just a bunch of really numbers with computers. Banks have computers, loan companies. It's numbers with Amazon and Walmart and all these. Oh, well, our computers show that we have this much money and this is how much everything's valued. And it's like, yeah. But it's also offset not just with gold, but how much properties are worth and commodities, and it's everything. It's also kind of a representation with that. And I think that is one of the things that'll happen, is that if Bitcoin grows where more businesses are using it, I think that'll help stabilize it so it's not fluctuating so radically. It'll always happen no matter what. But right now, it's just, it can change by thousands of dollars over an incredibly short period of time. And this isn't something that happens with other currencies. So if you were to take a look at the German exchange rate and the Japanese exchange rate, that doesn't happen. That doesn't happen. The only time that happens is whenever an economy is collapsing and it tanks. And there are some circumstances where you might want to get involved in something like that, but it's a little more advanced. And then one more thing that I want to show with Tim Pool here, with what he was talking about, is about this barbecue place here.
I went to a barbecue joint not too far from me, and they had a sign. They weren't selling beef. No beef. It's a barbecue joint. No beef. They had pork and chicken, though. Good stuff, by the way. Here's what they posted. The sign said, "Due to the huge price increase on beef this week, stemming from the gas shortage, we will not be serving brisket until it levels off. The supplies have doubled our price per pound. I don't feel comfortable charging the amount needed to just break even. Sorry, Gary."
So what is that? It's inflation. It's the purchasing power of the dollar has gone down. You can't spend a few bucks to go and eat anymore. Now you're spending a drastic amount more. And just to double it, just to break even? Who's going to go and be happy with that? Oh, well, I paid $15 for this brisket to have this meal, and now it's doubled and it's going to be $30? That's ridiculous. Why? Because the price went out of control. Because the price went up because there's a shortage of gas, and now there's a shortage of beef because of this these two attacks, the pipeline first and now this one with beef. What are you going to do? Increase minimum wage? Okay, so now for all their employees, they have to increase their wages. How do they get that money? They have to make it even more expensive. It doesn't do anything. It doesn't do anything at all. Unless you're rich, it's like, well, I got plenty of money. I have millions of or billions of dollars. I'll still go ahead and buy it. Okay, well, that's how many customers? How many customers are coming there and they have millions or billions of dollars and they can just throw it at all these small little businesses all over the place? It's like, no, they're all going to tank. They're all going to tank. Want to watch this video and discuss about, this is Ron Paul, about some of the wasteful government spending that's going on.
A group of us chose to filibuster this bill because we think it wastes money. We think it gives money to one of the most wasteful agencies in
Oh, why these stupid things come up?
government, the National Science Foundation. Since the early 1970s,
Oh, the National Science Foundation. I don't know what the hell it is that they've done. It's like, well, what new product or anything has the National Foundation come up with? Your phone? Does the National Science Foundation produce phones? Nope, they don't do anything. They do absolutely nothing. And he's going to lay it out here.
and since William Proxmire began giving the Golden Fleece Award, for 50 years there have been a recurrence of waste from the National Science Foundation, from NIH, and from even the State Department. We discussed earlier some of these, and I have a handful of more that I think the American people should know.
Oh, he already talked about some. I didn't know that. I don't want to watch it. It's cringe.
About where their money's going to. So the NIH spent $2 million in research to see if using a hot tub can lower stress.
$2 million to see if a hot tub can lower stress. What the hell for? I did not know that there were all these people who had hot tubs and they wanted to know the answer to this. I did not know that there were all these people who were perhaps maybe looking to buy a hot tub just to lower stress. Are you kidding me? $2 million. I don't care if it's $2. Well, what?
Really? I think we probably could have just agreed to that. But no, we had to spend $2 million to study if you're soaking in a hot tub, whether that helps to relieve your stress. Now, the NIH also spent about $1 million to see if they could help people overcome their fear of dentists.
What? To overcome their fear of dentists. I didn't know there was this epidemic of people who were fearful of their dentists. Are you kidding me? I just... You know what? We already have an answer for this. And this is, if for some reason, if there, which I'm sure there are, but for these people who have a fear of going to the dentist, we already have an answer for this. They're psychologists. And it doesn't matter what they find out here. They're still going to have to go to a psychologist to be able to work this stuff out. What is wrong with the psychologists doing their job and figuring this stuff out on their own? I don't understand it at all. Well, no, I take that back. I don't understand any good reason why this is done. Plenty of bad reasons. And that this is just a way that these politicians are able to slide money back and forth between them and their constituents. That's what that is.
Really? NIH spent almost $7 million of cancer research money to create an automatically flushing smart toilet. That's right. $7 million for an automatically flushing toilet. And here's the bonus. The toilet will actually take pictures of your derriere from the inside of the toilet bowl, should you wish to have those for posterity.
My mom died of cancer. I know a little bit about what they're talking because I looked into cancer some whenever all that was going on, and that they can tell by your stool to help identify some cancers. So I'm assuming it's something along those lines. I don't know who's going to be looking at these images of your stool. And even if they do, it's like, well, you're still going to have to go into a doctor anyways. You still got to have a checkup. And it's like there's nothing that's stopping the market from doing it anyways. That there are people out there who could go out who are part of the plumbing industry or the bathroom industry where they could design toilets to do this anyways. If there was really a demand for it. It's because there's not a demand for this. Nobody is interested in this. I don't care how you word it. It doesn't matter if nobody's interested in it. I mean, my mom had cancer and she was never interested in such a thing. I could have, I'm probably at a higher risk of having cancer because she had it. I'm not interested in it. It's just money laundering is what it is.
$7 million for a smart toilet. How does this go on and nobody does anything? You know what we do? We flush more money down this smart toilet. We give them more money and nobody bats an eye.
Yeah, and it's ridiculous because we have smart everything else. Smart TVs, smartphones, smart refrigerators. If they wanted to do this, they could. They don't need the government to do this at all. And it's because that's not what they're doing. It's money laundering.
This is the problem of government. Nobody denies the waste. Nobody denies the ridiculous projects that are being funded, and yet year in, year out it continues. We need to reform the process. We need to have a taxpayer advocate on the committee that votes on the projects. We need to have somebody with a grain of salt that is voting on these projects.
My response to that is no. Because we don't need these projects at all. They shouldn't be there in the first place. It's no different with the housing bubble and the Federal Reserve. The information is that every single time where you can allow competition, that hands down, absolutely 100% outperforms anything the government ever does. There's no market or economy for war. And there never should be if there was ever a way to do it. Maybe there would be a way. Doesn't need to be. That the government should absolutely do. Not flushing toilets, not any of this stuff from the science institution. No.
Who says that studying whether humans will eat ants to curb global warming, whether that's a useful expenditure of $3 million to...
And this is something that Tim Pool has been talking about is they've been making articles and politicians have been talking about eating cicadas, these little insects, and it's like, get the hell out of here. You know how we make things better? By taking steps forward, not backwards. You know why we have so much food? Because we didn't go backwards. We went forward. We came up with machines, tractors and combines, because we have these engines, and yeah, we use fossil fuels to do it, but now we're all fed. You know, it's like Rockefeller was one of the richest people alive during his time, and his son died because they didn't have penicillin at the time. And we didn't discover penicillin and be able to cure all these people with all these problems because we took steps backwards. It's because we said, here's a problem. How can we make things better? How can we change things so we can have what we want and what we need? We didn't get rid of it. It's just lies and manipulation, and I'm tired of being lied to.
Study whether or not humans will eat enough ants to keep the globe from warming.
You know, and so an example of this specifically is that they're now doing things like vertical farming, where it's all inside in a massive greenhouse kind of area, and they have less pesticides and they use less water because it's all environmentally controlled. So here's some pictures right here. So, well, these are videos. They have these massive greenhouses producing all of this vegetation. This is up in the Netherlands. And because it's climate controlled, you can see this, it's these really large ones. Click on Netherlands Farms right here. And this is it. It's just greenhouses all over the place. All these are greenhouses. And they have all these lights on because they're doing a light recipe. And a light recipe is where you have colored lights that reproduce the effects of the sun rising and then the sun setting. Because plants do different things whenever the sun's up versus the sun being down. And so if you want more root growth, or you want more stem growth or leaf growth or more production or whatever, then that's going to dictate if you want it to imitate the sun being up or being down. And that's why some of these have different colors to them, because they're changing the plant's growth cycle at the time. And so now up in these Scandinavian countries, up there in the Netherlands, where they have all of this extreme cold weather, they're able to grow produce all year round. All year. Instead of a very small little window opening. That means that if you want to produce like 100,000 tons of produce, you need a whole bunch of land to be able to do it that year to get it within that summertime. But if you can produce it all year round, where you can get, instead of just one harvest out of the summer, you can get like 4 or 5 harvests in a year, well, that requires less land. And then these things are not in the ground. They're all floating up above. Well, some of these are. And so like right here, these things are up. And then this way, whenever the water, if there's any water that drains off, it gets recollected and recycled instead of just falling deeper and deeper into the ground. They also spend less money on pesticides because pests can't get in. So then that means you're eating less pesticides and you have to worry less about this stuff because it's all inside a controlled environment. So this means lower expenditures, not just with the water, but with the pesticides. And you can give them exactly what it is that they need. And so here's a big old thing right here where it's just elevated up. And then you have vertical farming. So again, now can you produce produce all year long, but now you can stack it up. So this means even less land to be able to do all this stuff. Here's a really big one, and they do this all over. They will take an abandoned factory, an abandoned building, an abandoned lot, and they will build these things and have these producing in the middle of large towns, in large cities. And then that means that the transportation costs to be able to get fresh produce to these cities is drastically reduced because it's just, oh, well, the place is just down the street. Instead of coming from across the country or across the globe. It's like, oh, well, it's just right here. Because these things are climate controlled. Oh, this vegetation, this produce, it needs a higher temperature or higher humidity. Yeah, well, we can raise the temperature up. We can turn on the heater. We can do whatever it is that we need to do. Because it's all controlled. That's the way you solve problems. We don't need to go backwards and to eat bucks. It's like, no, we need to think of new ways of doing things better than they've ever been done before. Ridiculous.
This goes on, and the people at home are like, how could this happen? How could you spend money on this? But it happens year in, year out because we never vote for less money. It's always more.
And it's because people and these politicians push this idea that money is magic. Oh, well, if we just throw more money at this problem, we're going to solve it. I was unaware that that's all that it took. We've been throwing money at problems since the dawn of time. And it's not what works. It's not throwing money at the problem. It's giving people the incentive to make money off of what they discover. Because whenever you give money to people, it's like mission, objective, completed. I want money. I want to invent something. So because I see a need, I see a market, I see a place, a way that I can make all this money. Oh, the government's just giving me money? Man, done. I don't need to do anything else. I've got the money. And so their incentive drops drastically. Oh, yeah, you know what? They just gave me millions or billions of dollars. I'm going to go buy that really nice home. I'm going to pay it all off. And, yeah, you know what? The government funding stopped, but I paid for it all. I can take a much easier job. I can do something that's a little less stressful, a little more guaranteed in money. I don't have to do all this research and stuff because, you know what? I bought a nice home. I've furnished it with everything really nice. It's all paid for, and so it's just kind of basic living expenses. I also went ahead and did some investments. And they're paying for me. You know, I bought some real estate. I've got some rental properties. I've got some stocks, you know, and so I don't have to worry about it anymore. It's backwards. It's clown world.
A group of senators here today are filibustering this bill because somebody's got to point out that the waste and abuse of money goes on. The National Science Foundation, the king of wasteful spending, spent $100,000 to teach social scientists how to apply for grants. So it's not bad enough that we're just, you know, handing out money like...
Here's $100,000 so we can show you how you can take money.
It, you know, grows on trees, but then we got to teach people how to get more of the free money. There actually was another cache of money that went to Central American countries trying to teach them how to get more of our money. Really? We're actually teaching foreigners how to apply to get grant money from our government that's $28 trillion in the hole.
That's so ridiculous because, you know what, if these places are in distress, wherever this is, it's just like that Chinese proverb says. If you give a man to fish, he eats for a day, but if you teach him how to fish, then he can feed himself for a lifetime. It's the same thing. But instead of where you use fish, say money. Well, if you give a man money for a day, then he can feed himself and take care of himself for a day. But if you teach him how to earn money for himself, then he can have money to feed and take care of himself for his entire life. And that's exactly what they're talking about with fish. It's like if you just give him a fish, he hasn't learned any skills, he hasn't learned how to do anything. But if you teach him how to fish, then he can do it himself. Same thing with everything else. If you teach these people skills so then they can go take care of themselves and they can be productive to produce their own money, then they don't need any of this stuff. It's just an endless cycle. Oh, well, let's just give them more money. Why? Giving them money does not give them skills. It doesn't give them an education. It doesn't do anything. It's just they go from no money to now I've got $10 or whatever it is. You know, it's like, and what happens whenever that runs out? What are they supposed to do? They're in exactly the same predicament that they were in before. You solved nothing. You just delayed it.
We're annually $1 trillion in the hole. In the last couple of years, we're $3 to $4 trillion because of all these COVID bailouts and all of this crazy government run amok. And at the same time, we're $2-3 trillion in the hole a year. We're sending $100,000 to teach people how to get more grants. The USA...
Yeah, it's like, no, they need to learn how to get their own damn money. If whatever they're doing is so good, then they should be able to do fundraising or sell their goods and services or whatever the hell's going on.
ID spent $48 million helping disconnected Tunisian youth to not feel like, you know, they are a problem to society, to help them cope with modern society. Well, look, coping's not easy for young people anywhere around the world, but I guarantee $48 million that we don't have that we have to borrow from China to send to Tunisia is not a good expenditure of money, probably helped no one, probably enriched some contractors.
Yeah, no kidding. There's a good question that he asked, where, in a way, and that is, what's the information regarding these policies and being effective? Because you know what, maybe they were effective in something in some ways. It's like I'm willing to listen, but you have to present me with something, and I don't want to hear about your feelings. I don't want to hear about your emotions. I want the facts. Show me the numbers, the research, the data, and you have to be careful with that too, because that can be twisted and manipulated too.
Tractor somewhere. Somebody steals some off the top. There's always a little skimming operation. It was once estimated that as much as half to 70% of foreign aid was skimmed off the top, either by corrupt dictators in the countries receiving the money, or simply by graft throughout the government in these countries that we send the money to.
It's the same thing whenever we send food to foreign aid places, and this is part of what happened with what was it, Somalia? So there's this older movie called Black Hawk Down, and they talk about this a little bit, where we were sending, or the UN and America was sending food over there to help with these people who had problems getting food. And the warlords were just taking it and hijacking it, and they would shoot at the civilians and kill them. And none of this worked at all. I know there's people out there who have begun to wake up and said, you know what, we're not sending food anymore. Instead, we're going to send like farming equipment and seed and plows and hoes and all this stuff so you can grow your own damn food. Because whenever we just send food over there, we destroy whatever local economy that they have around food production. And then they have even less than they did before. So it just creates a dependency loop. It's like, no, you need to teach them. Who was it? Jordan Peterson talked about how there's this one country in Africa where they have so much unused fertile land that just this one country could feed the entire continent of Africa alone. Just from one country. Anyways. So now we're going to talk about this video with these senators here. And I'm not going to do PragerU's video here. I know I talked about it, but I'm not. And it's just because I've just got enough. And so right here, he has this little sign, the price is wrong. And that made me think of Happy Gilmore right here. And this is Bob Barker. He was the host of The Price is Right. So I wanted to show this just because I've got to lighten it up a little bit.
There is no way that you could have been as bad at hockey as you are at golf.
All right, let's go.
Oh! You like that, old man? You want a piece of me? I want a piece of you. I want the whole thing. Oh!
I love it. Bob Barker, he was just all in this. I mean, I'm sure he didn't do it, all of these stunts, because they do roll down the hill here. He's kind of spry for an old man. He was jumping around a little bit there. He got stabbed hard. So, of course, this is not Bob Barker. Oh, that'd break every bone in his body. He headbutts him. It's like, okay. So here we go.
The price is wrong, bitch.
And it's because, the price is wrong because it's Bob Barker, the host of that old show, The Price is Right. And that's what he has here. The price is wrong. So that's just a reminder.
In our country, the people on fixed income, they can't stay up with these price increases.
Let's try this again.
So we'll be glad to take any questions, but the bottom line is this. The Biden administration is hurting the poorest families in our country. People on fixed income, they can't stay up with these price increases. Our poor families, their wages, they're never going to go up as fast as these price increases. So they're hurting the poorest families in our country. Right now, it's happening all across this country. So be glad to answer any questions.
Yeah, I mean, this is what they're talking about right now with beef and with gas. Because this inflation has been caused from the budget, and then whenever you just have one little tipping thing, such as a cyber attack, it really exaggerates this stuff. And so if all these products, everything goes up with inflation, whenever you increase minimum wage, whenever you make a stronger demand, and part of the way that they're making more of a demand for these goods is that people aren't working. Because the Biden administration is just handing out money to people to not work. It's like, well then, how... That just makes things go up. So I like using the little Superman comic book reference because especially younger people kind of understand this. But whatever it is that you're trading, for older people, I guess it would be like baseball cards. If you had like a Babe Ruth baseball card, it's worth a lot because not only was he known for being a good baseball player, but there's just not a lot of those baseball cards left anymore from Babe Ruth. But if they were to go and find a whole bunch of them that didn't get recirculated and recycled, and they found like 10 million of them, that would drastically make them worse. They wouldn't make them worth very much anymore because now you've got all these millions of Babe Ruth baseball cards or Superman comic books or whatever it is. And it's the same thing with the dollar. That's why people want to buy Bitcoin, because the government cannot turn on the printing press for Bitcoins and make more Bitcoins. It is whatever it is. The biggest problem again though is that it's not stable. It's not backed up by anything like with the gold standard. But it can work itself out though if more companies and businesses got involved with it, especially if people started like banks with Bitcoin. It's like, hey, I've got Bitcoin, you can come and you can get a loan. But I don't see that happening though because it just fluctuates too much. Whenever it stabilizes, if it ever stabilizes, then yeah, you would want to introduce some kind of Bitcoin bank.
Anybody has? Yes.
What would you say to the White House argument that these increases in prices are just transitory, that what month does not make a trend, and that this is a natural part of the economy's adjustment to reopening?
Okay. Well, these are pretty big price.
So in case if you couldn't hear, she was asking, just kind of summing up, how do you know that this isn't just inflation that naturally happens versus inflation caused by the government? Is what she's asking.
Increases. We were with I was with Jay Powell. He said we wouldn't see inflation of more than 2.5%. This is a lot higher. Look at CPI now, 4.2%. Commodity prices up 16%. It doesn't look like it's very transitory. And by the way, if you look at these numbers from February, so before COVID to now, the numbers are still just as bad.
Well, from the government and COVID.
So, you never know what's going to happen. But if you look at all the things that they're doing, whether it's the tax increases, the regulatory reform, all these things are causing prices to go up. And it's going to hurt the poorest families in our country.
Senator Strickland, the price of fuel went up 9% from 2019 to 2020. Why did that happen?
I would blame it on reckless government spending. I've been complaining about the risk of inflation for the last...
I don't understand why we have so many conversations just about inflation. It's like we want deflation. We want stronger purchasing power. Where are those conversations? Well, why do politicians never talk about that? They should specifically be spitting that word out. And so the same thing with these politicians that we've been watching right now. I believe they're all Republicans. It's like, well, I haven't heard one of them talk about deflation. Why has that word not come out of their mouth? Why have they not talked about policies or getting rid of policies or whatever it takes for deflation? Because it's just all a scam. They're not really interested in making anything better. They're just up there grandstanding. That's all they're doing.
got up here. I believe excessive government spending, when you run big deficits, when you see the Federal Reserve balance sheet go from $4 to $8 trillion, when you see money supply going up.
Okay, and then how do you propose to counter that? You know, what do you want to get rid of, and why, and how? What's your plan?
25%, you're going to see inflation. So all this, but today, this year, already $1.9 trillion, anticipating to spend $7.1 trillion. This will be nothing as compared. I mean, it'll be way worse than this.
You also have to keep in mind that same period of time wages went up, largely due to the Jobs and Tax Cuts Act.
Can I just point out? So if you go back and look at the time I was governor of Florida, that's exactly what Senator Tella said, is that we started seeing our wages go up, which is the best thing you can see. If you can see all wages go up, not just wages for the...
That depends. If wages go up naturally, yes, absolutely, that's a good thing. And it does happen naturally all the time. So especially as a new technology or some kind of innovation happens, yes, wages will go up to help with the production of that service or good or whatever it is, you know, but at some point in time it becomes old and antiquated and it goes back down, and you don't fight to keep the old antiquated stuff around anymore. You let it die, you let it go, and you bring on the new and improved stuff.
The rich has the biggest impact on our country.
So inflation occurs when we have too much cash chasing too few commodities, too few products out there. And this will not be transitory if we...
And so that's exactly what's going on with the Biden administration, is that they're giving people cash to sit around and do nothing. They're not producing anything. So now we're going to have shortages of all this stuff because people aren't working. And this has been a problem going on since they've been locking everything down with COVID. And it's only gotten worse. And it's going to continue to get worse. You have to open the economy back up. All states, you know, you could argue that you could shut down a few states and see what happens. The only problem with that is that we've already done that. We've been there. We've just done it. We've been doing it for over a year. And all these states, the harder their lockdowns have been, the worse it's been. It hasn't done anything. And it's not like it's difficult to understand. It's like, of course things are going to go bad if you're not doing anything.
We keep paying people an extra $300 per week to stay at home. What that's doing is bottling up and creating more shortages. For instance, in the meat marketing program, we have, 75% of the nation's beef processing in Kansas, and we can't get people to come back to work. So that's creating an artificial shortage of beef, which is driving...
Well, I know exactly about all this stuff because for a little while I worked for DirecTV, and I would go off all over in Texas and in other states too, because we had a pretty large area that we had to cover. And there were plenty of these little towns where like half the population, small little places though, so it's not like it was a big... Half of these people were just sitting around doing absolutely nothing because they knew how to play the game. They were getting food stamps, they were getting Section 8 housing. There's programs out there where you can get them to pay a good portion of your utilities, and you've got Medicare, Medicaid, all this kind of nonsense. So they just didn't work. So now they're probably just living it up because $300 a week, I mean, that's $1,200 a month.
Up the price of meat at the grocery store.
Senator Scott?
Yes.
Officer Sicknick's mother just put out a statement saying that...
Oh my goodness. I want to hit this guy in the face for this next question. We are talking about the economy, and then this fool brings this up. It's like, stay on point. Oh, what a piece of trash.
Not having a January 6th commission to look into exactly what occurred is a slap in the face of all the officers who did their jobs that day. She's asking to meet with Republican senators who are going to vote against the January 6th commission, and I believe all 7 of you will. What's your message to officers to take mother, and who you meet?
Sure. Well, first of all,
So, in case if you couldn't hear, somebody's talking about how what happened with the Capitol on January 6th, and the framing of all of it was just, it was not in good faith at all. It was just horrible, and it was disgusting and all this stuff. And it's like, yeah, same thing with Antifa and the BML stuff whenever they're shooting all those people up and they're burning stuff down. I mean, just a few days ago over there with the George Floyd Square monument thing or whatever, and they started shooting with the reporters there. It's like, no, you've got double standards with all this stuff.
I mean,
and I don't know. You know, I don't know what this really is. So this is at Wednesday, the Republican Senate press conference. Senator Rick Scott blamed President Biden. So I guess this is a press conference. So I guess asking about this is fine too. I didn't read into the bottom there. I just saw this and that they were just. I thought they were focusing on the economy, and they probably are. But I guess since it's a press conference, it's open to any questions.
all the time, and I'm very supportive of FBI's already arrested.
More question.
Yes, sir.
Spending is your concern about reckless spending a plan of long-term infrastructure? The White House doesn't say long-term investments in the economy aren't going to cost being used for.
Well, I'll invest in infrastructure if it's called roads, bridges, airports, and seaports. I did $85 billion in my 8 years as governor. I think their original so-called infrastructure bill had $115 billion over 10 years for the whole country. It wasn't infrastructure. But the way we did it in Florida, we did it where we could cut taxes and reduce our debt. I paid off the same 8 years, a third of the state debt, and we cut taxes 100 times. What they're doing up here is they're saying that they want to spend all this money on so-called infrastructure. It's not, and they want to raise taxes. So you can't be, and they want to run up the debt. You can't do that.
Yeah. So the way that he's kind of phrasing it, the way that I took that, was that it's not a bill for infrastructure. It's a bill to just spend money, to raise taxes, to get even more money, so we can keep doing money laundering. I wouldn't be surprised at all. He said it doesn't do anything with the infrastructure. I wouldn't be surprised if this is more stuff where they're just going to go out and survey all these areas and take a look at the problems, and they're going to over-exaggerate their prices for all this stuff, and the people who are going to do it are going to be somehow affiliated with their constituents, so that they can just exchange money. This is something that happens all the time. What was it? The Twin Towers, whenever the hijackers flew the planes into it, whenever they originally built the Twin Towers there, they did it in I think a year and a half, 2 years or something like that. And whenever those towers fell, it just weren't those two towers. There were other large buildings that were around. It was the whole area. And they got damaged and destroyed too. And in 2 years, they got all those other buildings rebuilt and taken care of. And it's because a lot of them were just regular, offices and, with lawyers and whatever that they had there. They got it fixed like that. The Twin Towers was redone by the government. And it took them 8 years to do it. The first company that they had, they gave them $20 million and they didn't do anything. I think they did a little bit of cleaning up, and then they just took the rest of the money and they ran. Now that was a long time ago. Whenever I saw all that stuff, it was a documentary, so I don't know if anything's happened since then. That could have been, and it's they should have gotten their money back for that, because that was ridiculous. But yeah, it's just money laundering. That's all that it is. Well, I think this is a good place to wrap it up. We're going on close to 2 hours right here. I have a lot to say. I've seen a lot. I'm no spring chicken. I've been around the block. I'm tired of being lied to. I'm tired of being manipulated. They have all of these cool things that you can do on YouTube. I'll show you a couple of examples. So right here, what this is an infinity box. And somebody's done it up real different. They have infinity mirrors, and it's just the way that you play with double-sided mirrors. And this guy saw this video on YouTube, and he decided to change it up. Oh, I missed this one. So he made a well. Haha, that's cool. It's only this deep. Yeah. And see, it's not very deep, but because you play around with double mirrors, and you play around with lighting, and then you get something like this. So I guess this is like some kind of dead man's coach here. So you can see the coach isn't very big from end to end, but whenever you come around here, they're taking forever. It's like, yeah, we see it, get on with it. And you look into it, and it's just like this endless tunnel that goes on. And then they have the same thing with a book, Nooks. I thought these were kind of cool too. Here's one.
Feels weird. Picking it up.
Here's Hogwarts Express here. And this just goes on your bookshelf next to your books. And they have the infinity mirror things, and it's just a little decorative piece right there. And there's a lot of videos of people doing these things. And it's just limited to your imagination. It's like, this is what I would much rather be doing with my time besides this. Instead of having a house filled with just random nonsense that I bought, I would rather create memories with my friends and family of doing things like this. And so, you know, all the holidays you could spend doing this stuff. I mean, just take a look at Christmas. I mean, that's exactly what Christmas is you go out and you buy these things, but you can go out and you can make a lot of these things. Whenever I was little, the folks went out and they bought these little kits, and you could make your own Christmas ornaments. People would make their own nativity scenes of like a little snowy village, and they'd have little trains that would go on. I mean, I guess you would see that like on the news of somebody who did it. You know, you can see these like really fancy light shows during Christmas where the lights are blinking to the music. And if you know what radio station to put it on, then whenever you're driving on by, you can listen to the music as the house lights are flashing to it. And there's all these videos of people just doing these things at home, and it's like that to me is a much better use of my time than being a slave to money, trying to work my butt off to be able to provide just for food, clothing, and shelter. It's like, no, I want purchasing power. I want just a small amount of money to be able to buy a huge plethora of everything. So just an idea of how unhappy, I guess you could say, that I'm having to do this, but somebody's got to do it, so whatever. So if you've understood all this and you too are tired, well, let me take a quick little look over here at... I'm not trying to change anyone's minds about this. I'm trying to show the lies, intentional or not. I don't care if they're intentionally lying or if it's just... I want this to stop. I meant to put more on this, but what would be the pros and the cons? Who would be side A and side B? Let's take a little look here. Oh, I know why this is wrong. This is the old one. This isn't the new one. I'm going to have to transfer this over to the updated SOP, standard operating procedures, for how I'm going to do this. But let's go ahead and say side A, side B. So we're going to talk about government involvement / spending, helping the economy and the poor. What else? Purchasing power, improved big business, what was it that they called it? Too big to fail. just in case anyone's watching. Government wasteful spending. Lobbyists. / special interest. And that one's difficult because how do you get money out of it? There's just too many tax loopholes, and there's no way you can get around it at all. And it's just because other countries don't give a damn about what the U.S. policies are. They have their own. So, but yeah, I'm gonna transfer this over to the next one and hopefully get into this a little bit more as to what the two sides are with all of this stuff. Because if you were watching and you were following along, the information is in. But if you don't know anything about it, you're not going to know what the answer is. My website that I'm going to build is going to address this, where everybody is going to have the freedom to be able to express themselves. And so one of the functions is that if it's just a normal person, it's going to be labeled as an opinion. And that if you are somebody who's actually knowledgeable in this, and so you're going to have to prove it, then you're going to carry more weight with it. It's going to be divided up into a tier system. So the highest tier would be somebody who's got like decades of experience and they have their education and all this stuff, and they'd be like tier number 1. Everyone else can still weigh in, but if you're just a regular person, then you're going to be there at the bottom level because, what do you know? You might know something, so you'll be able to express yourself, but we're going to know who you are because I'm tired of trolls. I'm tired of kids spouting off who live in their parents' basement. It's like, no. I want to hear from the experts, and I want to know what the facts are. I do not care about your feelings being predominant with this. You can still put it there because maybe it is something that needs to be addressed, but until we have some kind of plan to address it, it's like I want it off to the side. Whenever you figure out something to do, then let's talk about it. So if you understand all this and you're tired of the lies and the manipulation, help me out and give me a thumbs up on that video. Give it a like. I have Patreon and Subscribe that you can help out with all this. Become a member. It doesn't matter if you like YouTube or not, or Bitchute or whatever it is that you're using. No, that's wrong. That's a straw man. That is not helping me out. I need the help, and this is what I have available right now. So that's why I need you to do those things, and then share this video with others. Talk about it. Be like, is this guy talking correctly here? Is this just him, or does he have evidence? And it's like, no, I'm looking to the professionals. This is why I show these videos of other people. Tim Pool, he's not too much of a professional with some of this stuff, but whenever it comes to journalism, and he's really good about pointing out the lies that the media does. And it's like, yes, I want all that shown. So anyways, thanks for watching. I hope that you've enjoyed. I hope that you learned something, and we will see you again later. Bye.